few months back, I'm sure we all were very aware, because it was quite an accomplishment. This little man-made, human-made object found its way, after traveling for months and months and months, to a comet that was racing across the solar system and did something that had never been done in human history. This little object managed to land on this twirling, speeding comet. It took an unbelievable bounce, and it ended up in the shadows, so the batteries didn't last very long. But really, truly, everything worked. And for a bit of a time, this thing was sending back data we had never, ever heard in human history about the very beginnings of things. And even as we sit here this morning, this other contraption that was pretty much put together just across the street over there, at this very second is making its way across another planet that we named Mars. And it's making its way to places human beings have never, ever been before in their lives. Day in and day out, this rover is sending back information, data about this planet that we've always seen but never understood. Why? Why do we do all this? Why would we invest so much human capital, human ingenuity, energy, and so many billions of dollars to reach these remote objects hurtling through space? We do that because we want to take those rocks up there and we want to split them open and we want to listen to them. Because you see, even rocks carry stories. That's why we do all that. To hear the stories that have been held in those stones for billions and billions of years, never ever told, never ever heard, ever. Rocks tell a story that goes back to the beginning of time, that has to do with how life occurred and how we, you and I, got here. We have invested so much to letting those stones talk and begin to tell their story. Why? Tell me, why would we not work even a little bit harder to hear the stories that are around us all the time? Why would we not go to extraordinary levels and depths of things to get across from the chasm between me and the person next to me, to hear the story about what makes them tick and how they became who they are and what matters to them, what it takes for them to live their lives? Why can't we take the time to listen to other people's stories? These stories that people carried in the bones, like the stories that are carried in those stones, as surely as those stories are carried in the stars. Stories. The universe is filled with stories. The first time that really hit me right between the eyes, I was in high school, early high school, maybe I was about 15 years old, and it was just around the beginning of these things called malls. I wasn't driving yet, and so I would go everywhere with my parents, and oftentimes they got very much on my nerves. And there was one particular afternoon, we were making our way through this mall, and I just needed a little bit of space from them. I was getting a little grouchy with them, and it was being a difficult time. And so I just sat my rear end down on a bench in this mall. And I said, "Come and get me when you're done." We didn't have cell phones to text me to meet at the car, so "Come and get me when you're done. I'm finished. I'm finished." It was also a way to make sure I didn't say anything more stupid than I had already said. So I sit down on this bench and I just start looking around. I wonder if anybody else has the problems I have. I wonder if there's anybody else in the world that doesn't get along with their parents when they're 15. I didn't know, really. And all of a sudden, I just started to see people, all these people walking past. I saw this little old lady kind of bent over a little bit on the other side of me, and all these people walking past. And I got to thinking, who are they? Who are they? What are they doing? Where are they going? What do they carry in their bones? What kind of suffering? What kind of struggles have been theirs? And I started to realize in my own little 15-year-old way that, I'm like the hero of my story. I'm the protagonist. I'm the center of my story. But I'm not the center of theirs. They are. And I wondered what it was like to be in their head, to see the view they were seeing from over there instead of only me, my own view from over here. And I got to tell you, I started to tear up. I started to cry over all these stories that are out there that I never really ever thought about before, and how this all works. Right here, right in this place, sitting alongside of you, stories you've never heard, ever. I love being at the Catholic Student Center. I really, really do. I've been here almost 24 years now, but what I really love is you. And when I get to know your story, I can't begin to tell you how touched I am. But what I never even knew about you, even though we were here Sunday after Sunday, some of us for 20 years. I remember not too long ago, it was one of those Christmas potluck things, those progressive dinners, and I was with a couple that I had seen here a million times, but had never really had a chance to talk to because they don't hug me after Mass. The line's too long, Father. But while we were talking, I don't even know how we got there, but all of a sudden I found out that their college-age son was murdered when he was in college. Murdered. I had never known that story that they carried in their bones. And yet I looked at him just like I'm looking at you right now, Sunday after Sunday. I keep thinking my story is the only story that matters. But I think what Advent's trying to do is get us unplugged from our own story and being our own hero, and begin to get us to get into the story of other human beings around us all the time, and those we've never ever met even. To let go and turn out and actually help people turn their stories out to the world too. It is a great privilege to hear the story of another human being. This past Tuesday night, Senator Jack Danforth and Senator Joe Lieberman had a conversation on the stage in Graham Chapel. And Jack Danforth said something that actually, I have to tell you, brought me back to that little 15-year-old confused Gary who was having a hard time with his mom and dad. And all he said was, just across the street, is something I also find echoed in so many pages of our Christian Bible. He just said, I don't know if you know. Somebody asked a question about racism, and he said, I don't know if you know, but he said, I think this was the number, he said, I think 85% of blacks thinks the cop is guilty. 85% of blacks in North County think the cop is guilty. And he paused for a second, he goes, what I learned is that each of them has a horror story to tell. That's why they think that. A horror story each of them has to tell that involves police. Well, he thought then, and I thought as he was talking, holy mackerel. I don't have any horror stories that have to do with police. The point was that brought me that night, just this past Tuesday, back to 15-year-old Gary in that mall, was we don't know each other's stories. We don't know what matters to each other. And therefore, we never really get a chance to let people know that they matter. And in the lively exchange of all this, finding out that I matter too. We've not listened to the stories out there around us all the time. Another talk at WashU, just near the beginning of the semester, and I scribbled this down on the back of the program because I was blown away by this thought. It was simply this quote: "Tolerance," he said, "tolerance is an empty virtue unless you actually know something about the people you're tolerating." Tolerance is an empty virtue unless you know something about the people you are tolerating. In history, we have too often killed what we do not understand. As we move closer and closer to the mystery of Christmas, we're going to start to get to know this story God told in the life of Jesus of Nazareth. This story that carries so many other stories. A story of so many stories. And as we begin to gather with our families, there will be so many stories available to us around the table and around the Christmas trees, in our homes, in our neighborhood. It's time for us to let those stories be heard. We rip through our Christmas presents and get them open in a breath, but we have yet to open the gifts that are around those trees that are more precious than gold, that are more precious than all those gifts we just received. The precious gift of our moms and our dads and our sisters and our brothers and our sons and our daughters and our grandmas and our grandpas. Stories that have been there all the time, and we're running out of time to hear them in those beautiful families. Friday night, I finished everything around 10 p.m., and so I thought, I'm going to go see my dad. I wonder if he's still awake. And so I drove to Our Lady Life Apartments in South County, and sometimes when I go there and his light's off, I can see it from the parking lot. I just say a little prayer for him and leave. And it was nice to drive out there. And so I got there and his light was on, and I called him upstairs, and he was asleep. But obviously awake then. He said, come on up, I'd love to see you. And so we talked for about an hour and a half, and we were laughing about some stuff, and he told me two stories I've never heard before. I've been his son for 63 years. And I was so moved, and I have to tell you, I drove away understanding Gary Braun better because he got to understand Ralph Braun better. His dad. Oh my gosh, there's just so much here, so much here, so much here. You know, just after the homily this morning, we have a tradition here right before Christmas of blessing pregnant women. And I'm in awe of this whole thing. We bring up women who are seeking to adopt. We bring up women who are seeking to be foster parents and women who are pregnant. And one of the things that blows me away is they're holding in their story, in the story of their own life, this whole new story that is not their own anymore. And it's already begun. It's already begun. It's happening. This story is already being fashioned and told. And soon, very soon, it's going to be released into the world by its very own name. A single new human story, waiting to be listened to, waiting to be told, waiting for somebody to ask, waiting for somebody to take the time. And tonight, at the 9 p.m., as is our tradition, we bless those who will be going on service trips. This year we have 24 from our community students who will be going to El Salvador and to Mexico, the most we've ever had. 2 service trips this year because we couldn't even carry them all in one. And they're going to be serving blind kids, they're going to be helping the blind, and they're going to be helping children, and they're going to be working with them in agriculture. But even more, you know what's going to change them the most is hearing the stories of those people who are very different than they are. In culture and language and economics, in education. What's going to be most richly received will be their stories. What ends up happening when this happens? Isaiah talks about it in the first reading today. What happens is liberation. What happens is liberation. The story gets released from the rock. It gets released from our bones. It gets released into the world. When people have a chance to tell their story, they have a witness to their lives. People are crying out to have somebody witness to their life. And that validates their life. It affirms them. It tells them that they matter. And it sets them free from feeling like they don't. That's liberation. There's so many issues at the world's heart right now, so many issues. And I believe with all my mind, heart, soul, and body, if we just began to listen to each other better, to each other's stories, especially those most different from us, even in the families that we gather with these holidays, people are going to walk away empowered. And we're going to know ourselves better. This is not a small thing. How can we not do that for each other? How can we not? Would it be a noble goal this Christmas if you said to yourself, I'm not leaving the table, I'm not leaving that family's home till I get to know something new about them I never knew before? How can we not do that for each other? Especially those we tend to judge harshly, like even our moms and dads when we're 15. Let the stories be told. What's going to happen is that there will be joy in the streets. There will be joy at our tables. And the violence that marks our city streets now will give way to joy. The data from those comets is being deciphered even now. The data, the information from that planet, that red planet Mars, continues to tell its story even now. Right now, even today. And stories that have been locked up for billions of years are being heard. And as the teacher said, for the first time in human history, the rocks and stones themselves begin to sing. The rocks and stones cry out.